on your chairs. This is downloaded from History Colorado. This is an article that our wonderful speaker and presenter, Kayann wrote. You now have that copy thanks to her allowing us to do that. You are welcome to take those with you. If you don't want them, you may also leave them, and we'll sell them through the year and make some money. So that's how we handle that. The other thing is, in the back of your book, you will see Old Lang Syne. One of the things that we did was we took the Bluebird songbook, and Sophia very kindly transposed everything like that onto a piece of paper. We're going to start the evening with the singing of Old Lang Syne. We're going to get this pipe or this pump organ pumping, and from that point on, then we're going to turn it over to Kayann to get moving on what she's going to be presenting. Please keep your questions till the end. There will be plenty of time for that. And after she's finished, we're going to also sing Jingle Bells with the words that they came up with, and Let Me Call You Sweetheart. Both of those will be a cappella. So we're going to start with Old Lang Syne, but before we do that, I want to turn it over to Boyd for a moment. He has something to mention also.
First of all, let me just say that we realize as a board and a community, but more board-wise, that a lot of museums in small towns are disappearing, and they're disappearing because of population changes, economics in the small communities and that kind of thing. And Gold Hills Museum is thriving, and we're thriving because of you. And this is your museum, it's your artifacts, it's your history, it's your culture. So this event is for you, from the board, and from people who work so hard for the museum to feel like you're valued when sometimes people give things and you don't get recognized for that, but that's what this whole gig is about. So pat yourselves on the back and thank you. So there's somebody I want to introduce to you, but before I do that, you've probably noticed, well, let me do two things. The first thing is, and Rick Sinner will, I think, really enjoy this. He started about 10 years ago trying to get that cash register back there turned over to the Museum of Gold Hill. A little bit of backstory on that is, most of you know that came down through my family, and it was in our house, and I would plink on that as a little kid. It was in a closet. My grandfather didn't know what to do with it when he was ready to pass on, so he donated it to the Museum of Boulder. It was in their archives, and through Rick's initial contact and some follow-up, today, myself and somebody I will introduce to you have finalized that deal. The cash register now belongs to this museum in the town of Gold Hill. A little bit of backstory. You've probably noticed that there's two portraits up here. Jean Sherwood, who a lot of you know her as Holiday House, the Bluebirds, them coming to Gold Hill, all that kind of stuff. This is a portrait of her, and this is a loan to us. Okay, and it's in the archives at the Museum of Boulder, and we have it here, and we're going to try and work it into other exhibits and that kind of stuff. This is, and a lot of you are very familiar with Marie Ricard. She is a descendant of the Vanderpoels. Tilda Vanderpoel was a Bluebird, and she was an instructor of art, and she taught for the Chautauqua movement, and this is the early 1900s. This is one of her students. She did that portrait of her. The backstory is that there was a couple that ended up with this in Santa Fe. And I won't give you all the details because I probably don't know them all correctly. But information was sent to Marie, and also before we existed as a museum, this couple from Santa Fe donated this to the Museum of Boulder. Marie wanted to see it. So she and I went there several months ago, and it was brought out of the archives, and we were able to actually look at it and enjoy it. And in that process, Marie was like, I sure would like that to come back to Gold Hill. Well, the curator of the Boulder Museum. No, I'm not. Okay. She said it fits perfectly within the mission of the Museum of Boulder because part of their mission is women of the progressive era. And so she said, I will lend it to you, we can display it, I really want you to have it in essence, but it's going to stay as a possession of the Museum of Boulder. That's great. The reason that's great is they have a way to store it really well. It fits with their mission, and then we can enjoy it when we would like to have it. So Tilda did this, and as you know, we have other paintings from Tilda, and Marie has several of them in her house. And so this is another connection to the Bluebirds. Both of these pieces of art have come to us tonight because of the person I would like you to meet, and that's Elizabeth Nosek, and she is the curator of collections and exhibits for the Museum of Boulder, and currently she's the only curator, and we've had great conversations about sharing things and doing exhibits together, et cetera, et cetera. So Elizabeth, thank you for being here, and if you'd like to stand up.
It's a little sticky, it's a little weird, but it works.
We're going to see along with the birds, so they're going to see.
This is all blank sign. This is get it started. Ready? Go. Good job.
Well, let's start. I hope you all can hear me. I'll try to speak as loudly as I can. And,
Not so much.
Cassidy,
Speak real loud.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Where's now?
Okay. Well, I want to thank Deborah and Edgar. I want to thank everybody on the museum board for inviting me up here. It's really a thrill Rick Sinner, who's here, right? And Ken Fernald and Brian Finn, who shared information with me over the last couple of years, and also Maggie Sims, for writing a wonderful play, and so many other things. So thank you, and thank you all for being here, of course. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself and how I came to the Bluebirds. So I grew up in Greeley, which you know is on the plains, right? But honestly, when I was growing up, it only took a half-hour drive to get to the mouth of the Big Thompson. And my dad was a surveyor, and so he surveyed a lot in the Rockies and the wilderness. He was even flown in by helicopter for surveys. He loved being out. And he would find these places, little lakes, abandoned houses, etc. So on the weekend, he would take us up to the mountains, and we'd have picnics up there. And so that was part of my love of the mountains. Also, I always went to Girl Scout camp and church camp, and all kinds of things camped when I was in high school, etc. Went to school at CSU, and then at CU for my Ph.D. Now I live outside of Lyons. So the mountains are a part of what means home to me. That's part of my Bluebird thing. So probably some of you have read A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. If you haven't, I totally recommend it. It's really fun. She was quite an amazing woman. I took a class on women writing the West in 1977 when I started my undergrad at CSU. And I've reread this many, many times. So Bird was an English woman. She'd been to what was called the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and she was coming back to England, but she wanted to come up to Longs Peak, to Estes Park, because she heard how incredibly beautiful it was. And so she did. She made it in 1873, in September of 1873. She was the second white woman to make it to the summit of Longs Peak, although she had to be hauled up to the top by this recluse guy, desperado, some people call him, named Mountain Jim, and he took her up here. And they had a little bit of a thing, nobody really knows, right? But that's interesting to read in the book as well. So she traveled up and down the Front Range on her little pony named Birdie with her little pistol. And had all these adventures, which she wrote about in letters and sent them home to her sister. And then when she got back to England, she collected them in a book called A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. And that's actually a first edition that is owned by the Estes Park Museum. So I want to just read a little bit from her first letter after she got to Estes Park. This is what she wrote. So in this glorious upper world, with the mountain pines behind and the clear lake in front, and the blue hollow at the foot of Longs Peak, where the hoarfrost crisps the grass every night of the year, I have found far more than I ever dared to hope for. And I think that sense of longing and discovery is what the Bluebirds were looking for, and what they found as well in Colorado, in Boulder County, up here in Hill. And the Chicago papers carried the story of Isabella Bird there. I mean, a lot of papers did, because it was kind of a big deal. And I'm sure that the early Bluebirds would have read this book and known about her coming up to the Rockies. But I'm also mentioning to her because in her book, she writes that the Rocky Mountains are, and this is what she said, no region for tourists and women. Even though she was both of those things, right? As are the Bluebirds. So I kind of want you to keep that phrase in mind, She had a big old adventure, but it was no region for tourists and women. Okay. So I first saw the Bluebird Lodge in 2013, came up for our anniversary on the solstice. Tomorrow's my 25th wedding anniversary, so and we've come back many, many times, of course. And then in 2018, a friend and I were kicking around the idea of doing an anthology about women in the West. And I thought I would write a chapter researching, and then I realized there's a lot to say about the Bluebird. So I thought, I'm going to write a book. And I gave a talk at Western Literature Association in 2019. I gave a talk for the Colorado Women's History Symposium in Denver. So I've given a few talks. And some of them were about this mystery album in the Carnegie. That's what article that you have. And if you can't read it on paper, you can go, well, just Google it, and it'll come up. It's in the Colorado Magazine, and you can read it there. And it actually won some awards, so I'm happy to say. Yeah. So my interest is in reclaiming women's history, particularly in the West, because you all know Western history isn't just about the fur trappers and the cowboys and the miners. You know, the miners that came up here, many of them had wives, right, and families. And there were also all the women who came to Colorado as part of the settlement movement. You know, the pioneers across the prairie, that's my heritage from, originally from England and from Norway, and then Minnesota, and Illinois, and Dakota, and Colorado. But the Bluebirds were later than that, okay? So my focus is on looking at them through the lens of a large movement called New Women. And these were the first generation of educated women. It's about from 1890 to about 1920. And it did overlap with suffrage, but it wasn't just suffrage. If you think of suffrage as a political movement with organizations and leaders, New Women was a bigger movement than that. It was a social movement of social attitudes and also progressive issues. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the movements. So you all know, this stuff, but I'll just, try to go over it quickly. The Bluebird Club was founded by Jane Sherwood and Matilda Vanderpool. They were from the Chicago Art Institute. They taught the very first year of the Chautauqua in Boulder. It was called the Texas-Colorado Chautauqua because there was a lot of Texans coming up because it was so hot in Texas. They thought it was cooler here, right? Not today, but yeah, it was. And so that is, actually there's that picture right there. Matilda Vanderpool in the middle on the top, James Sherwood on the right. And that guy on the left is named Charles Cox. And he was English. He was from Liverpool and then from Texas. And he may have had a connection to Gold Hill, which I will mention in a minute. Okay. Oh, and I want to say, there was an art tent originally at the Chautauqua. You can see the tent in the two photos. And then they built an art hall. But unfortunately, it's not there anymore. I think they got rid of it because they wanted a larger park area. And you can kind of see on the right, on the lower right, with the white hat towards the end, I think that's Sherwood. And I think Vanderpool might be the one who's kind of leaning over on the picture on the right. I don't think they're in the other picture. I can't quite tell. So, at Chautauqua, Jane Sherwood taught art appreciation and art history. Those were her things. She was not an artist herself. But Sherwood was a do-gooder. She was a wealthy philanthropist. She had concerns for single working women, or at least women pretty much in white-collar jobs. And at that time in Chicago and elsewhere, those were primarily white women. And, as you know, Matilda Vanderpool, she was an artist, and we're lucky to have that over here. And she was also a teacher at the Chicago Art Institute. She was one of Georgia O'Keeffe's teachers there, which is very cool. At Chautauqua, she was in charge of studio work, and she was the children's art director. She taught a weekly sketch class, which I think is what you see. That is Matilda Vanderpool's on that rock. So I'm glad that this says also that she was co-founder, because I think she doesn't get the credit she deserves for how she helped Jane Sherwood, together, start the Bluebirds. And Marie, her sister-in-law, said that as well, and I think that's very, very true. And together the women recognized that Boulder's natural beauty and economic growth provided an opportunity for Chicago women workers to get away from the city for their help. Let me take a little bit of water. I'm not used to projecting quite so much. Okay, so there were two main reasons for the Bluebird's travels to Colorado. The first, more overt reason that they talk about all the time was health. And the second, more subversive reason was freedom from gender restrictions. So remember that Colorado was the second state to grant women's suffrage, but it was the first state in which men voted for women to get suffrage. Because in Wyoming, they just passed, the legislature passed it. But in Colorado, men actually voted for women to have suffrage. And so that was in 1893. Illinois did not get full suffrage until the nation did, which was 1920. They had some limited suffrage, and they were also the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, which was women's suffrage. So, for Illinois suffragists, Colorado might have seemed like a haven of progressive politics. I mean, they had progressive politics in Chicago, it's true. But in terms of women's roles, this was very attractive, I'm sure. So Sherwood and Vanderpool decided to create a vacation home and club for single, self-supporting, that's what they were called, working women, self-supporting women. And by and large, that meant middle-class, white women in jobs like teachers, nurses, secretaries, and bookkeepers, those kinds of jobs, women who had a little bit of their own money. But there weren't just those women, that was kind of predominantly the club. Okay. So since at that time, married women were allowed to purchase property on their own in Colorado, which was not true across the nation, Sherwood purchased 4 lots in a brand new subdivision near the Chautauqua in November 1906. And these are at the corner of 12th and Baseline. Baseline was called Park Avenue then because it was, right in front of the park. And in 1910, Sherwood approached the Arts Institute and the Chicago Women's Club for help in securing $10,000 to build the house, and with a new cooperative method I'll talk about in a minute. But apparently, Isabella Bird wasn't the only one to think that Colorado's Rocky Mountains were no region for women and tourists, because the Art Institute men that Sherwood and Vanderpool approached for funding thought Colorado was too far for women to go on their own. So apparently, to some people in Chicago, Colorado was still the Wild West back then. These are actually pictures from Boulder in the Carnegie, right? And I'm not sure which billiard hall that was, but maybe the one that's kitty corner from Sunset View, from the Vanderpool cabin. And they had probably read Eugene Field's poem, Casey's Top of the Dough, which is Gold Hill Inn. And they knew all about the wild mining days, and this is from the poem. When the money flowed like liquor, and the folks was brave and true, when the nights was crisp and balmy, and the camp was all astir, with the joints all throwed right open, and no sheriff to demur. So Field's, poem helped create that idea of what was going on. But luckily, Sherwood and Vanderpool and the other women, they did not listen to that. They collected $1,500 in donations, and the rest of the money came from women workers who purchased $10 blocks, which allowed them the lifetime privilege, for $10, lifetime privilege of 2 weeks of vacation, originally at the cottage, and then up here, every year. And they only had to pay for their board. And in the first year, board was just $5 a week. So it was even at that time, it was a fairly inexpensive vacation. And by the way, the round trip fare from Chicago to Denver and back was $25 in 1911. Yeah. And then it went up to $40 in the 1940s. So, again, it was reasonable for women who had a pretty good job. And to oversee this nonprofit, Sherwood and Vanderpool formed the Holiday House Association. Sherwood was president, Vanderpool and other leading Chicago new women were on the board, and that included Jane Addams of Hull House. You might have heard of Jane Addams, kind of the star of social work in this country. Judge Mary Baltony, which she was a very progressive judge, and especially for children's issues, and labor activist Agnes Nestor. And I go in my book, which isn't published yet, I go into in my book quite a bit about Hull House because that was very inspirational to Jane Sherwood in thinking about this cooperative home. And also kind of cool tie with Bluebirds here is that Jane Addams paid for a young Italian immigrant woman to come to Gold Hill in the early years here as a way to help her out, and because she had plain cut and nervous breakdown. And so Jane Addams paid herself for Frances Molinard to come out here, which is, I think, really cool. Okay, so also in 1910, Vanderpool and Sherwood rode up to here. And this is actually from the museum, this museum. It's a real photo postcard. And here they are with John and Mary Cox at their home at 550 Pine Street. They bought it in 1896. They had come from England in 1876. He was from Devon, she was from Cornwall, those are neighboring counties, and he came to be a miner. And I haven't yet found a connection with Charles Cox of Chautauqua, but there probably is a connection because why are Vanderpool and Sherwood at the Cox's house in Gold Hill? I mean, I think there probably was some kind of connection. So if anyone knows anything about the Coxes, can fill me in on that. Okay, so a few words about the cottage itself. It was designed by Arthur Saunders. He was the architect of the community house at Chautauqua. Probably you've all seen it. That's where the silent films are shown, and also small concerts are there. So it's very similar looking to this, right? And I'm sure these women knew him, and they commissioned him to build this cottage. The type of construction is called rubble, which meant that a lot of the stones came from the excavation. It is built into the hillside right across from Chautauqua. And also there is large stones there. Those came from the quarry at Chautauqua. Let's see. That's good. Oh, it's a typical bungalow. It has that big front porch. And then also it's a 1.5 story. It has it goes up like this with the dormers. And so in the early years, that upstairs part was all open, and they slept in there. And later they made rooms up there. Here's a couple more pictures. The kitchen and the dining room were at the back there. Do you see that big loggia, that big arch? That was the back door. To the right of that was the dining room, and the kitchen was kind of where that bump out is. Let's see. Vanderpool reportedly painted a mural in the dining hall over the fireplace, but that is no longer there, I'm sorry to say. I did get to visit the cottage in 1918, and it is not there. Let's see. Construction started in March 1911, and in June, same year, the first Bluebirds came out. That is how quickly they built that cabin. That's right. Cottage, that's pretty amazing, right? And then on the bottom, in the very corner, there is another building they put up later. That is called The Nest. It's also still there. And that became Jane Sherwood's home, and that is where she was living when she died. Okay, so, they soon outgrew the cottage. They erected a tent, not the one in the upper right hand, but the little building there. They originally had a tent. They called it the Brown Palace, like the Brown Hotel down in Denver. And then they were able to build that little house. It's not there anymore. And they have a nest. You can see their garden. They had a vegetable garden. So then they started doing these camps up at Green Mountain, which was owned by Boulder. And so they called it Camp Tracy. E.M. Tracy was their manager. And you can see her, she's got the bowler hat. She's behind the sign. She's the one with the bowler. That's E.M. Tracy. Okay. Sherwood is to the left of the banner. I love that she's carrying her little purse. That is so cool. So they had that for a few years. And then they just needed more room. And they wanted to be up in the mountains. So that's when they came up here. And I'm sure this is very familiar to you. Let's see. I'm going to go kind of quickly through Gold Hill because Deborah and I, you guys know a lot about Gold Hill. And so I wanted to kind of fill in other aspects of the Bluebirds for you, but I can't not say something. So anyway, when they first came up in 1919, they stayed in 2 cabins. That is Green Swallow and Innisfree, right next to each other. They rented those cabins out originally in 1919 and 1920 they stayed there. And then in August of 1920, they bought the Wentworth Hotel. Oh, I wanted to say, also Holiday House Association in 22, they bought the Green Swallow, and that became Sherwood's cabin. So that's where she stayed. She didn't stay in the lodge after that. So here's the lodge. 3 different time periods. They paid $350 for the lodge. They went back to Illinois, they raised the money like in 10 minutes about it. And so on the lower left, that's when it was, that's actually after the Wentworth. It was called the, what was it called? The Kinney House or something. What was it? Something like that. The right-hand picture on the lower right-hand, that is from the Mystery album. And that was the 1921, the album is dated. That was the first year that the Bluebirds stayed in the cabin. They might have camped out there in 1920 in the fall when they were cleaning it up. But for the first official year was 1921. And then of course up at the top, you see a bunch of Bluebirds. And that's after 1946 when the inn was built. You can see the inn. But also you can tell because the siding has been taken off. You can see the logs, and that railing was put onto the porch. Those all tell us it was after 1926. So, Vanderpool and her sister-in-law Marie bought Sunset View in 1923. Many other women bought properties in Gold Hill too. And I'm not going to go into the story of all that here. But when my book comes out, I will come back, and I will share my mapping project with you, how I mapped where the Bluebirds lived in this community. And here's a little teaser. Over the 40-some years they were here, they owned 35% of the lots in Gold Hill, which I find pretty astounding. Okay, and then again, in 1926, the dining and recreation hall and the kitchen were built, and that gave them a lot more room in the lodge. So then they could have between figures, I've seen figures between 60 and 75 women at a time staying in the lodge. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, so pretty cool. I love these little pictures of the inside. Let's see. So when they had the cottage and the lodge, they housed 400 women a summer during the peak, and they estimated that over 6,000 Bluebirds came to Colorado. Which, I mean, think about that: 6,000 women from Chicago coming out here in the time that they ran the Bluebirds. Okay, that's great. So in the 19-teens, single women did not often or easily travel by themselves. Their parents were worried about unmarried daughters traveling alone, and married women were supposed to travel with their husbands. So, the Bluebirds, though, were traveling for health. And that was one of the reasons that women could travel alone or with other women. It was acceptable in the teens to travel for health. But, so even Isabella Bird, right, she traveled for health, for bad back, which is pretty amazing. She was riding her little pony up and down the front range with bad back. I'm not sure how to work. But anyway, the Holiday House Association even said in their brochure that they existed for the promotion of good health and rest, and the inspiration given by mountain altitudes and rarely beautiful scenery. That was part of their original charter. Okay. So, in 1927, in the Christian Science Monitor, Jean Sherwood said,
I know of nothing better for a girl who comes out here tired than to give her a sandwich lunch and let her spend the day alone in the mountains. Parties of girls with a guide go out on 3-day trips, sleeping under the stars at night. As for clothes, it's just a knicker suit and a sports shirt.
she's the best showman. Thank you. All right. I want to point out in this picture, there's a woman on the very right who appears to be a woman of color. I don't know who she is. I would love to find out. They did have an African-American cook for 12 years at the cottage. I've done a lot of research about her. I talked a lot about her. In the book, her name was Cleora Reeves. She was from a very important black family in Boulder. She did go to college, and she also came up here and cooked at the lodge, and we talk a lot about her. But that is not her. I know that is not her. So it wasn't completely a group of white women, and it would be wonderful to know more about who this woman is. Okay. The railroad company is right here. Nope, sorry guys. Okay. In a 1932 Bluebird bulletin, extolled the difference between the mountains and the city. So that's something to always keep in mind. The urban versus the wilderness, right? They came from this really, really urban area out here. It was super different. And they said, Audubon, Arapahoe, Longs, and Meeker, which dwarf and cheapen the showy towers of Michigan Avenue, which dominate our working days. We remember the snap there was to living up there, in contrast to our limp days in the Chicago heat. And I know it's lovely. And the Bluebirds embraced what they called sun baths, but that was like fully clothed, right? Laying on the grass in all your clothes. That was a sun bath. And they believed that, and not only them, but this was kind of a health thing at the time, real ultraviolet rays make for rugged health. And one bulletin said that prowling around the mountains helps digestion and sleep. And prowl they did. So the railroads wanted to get in on this, right? They realized the potential for travel between Chicago and Boulder, and they created these special Bluebird brochures, just for the Bluebirds. And they had devoted staff. They had women on their staffs who only worked with the Bluebirds. And I'm going to read you a little bit. Very elevated language, right? This is from one of the Burlington Northern brochures that said, here the sky has a rare view of an Italian sky. The pines blow balsam breath, heartening to weary bodies and minds. Balsam breath, that is what you are all breathing up here. I would like to know. But the crisp mountain air and wilderness immersion brought more than good health. It brought independence to city women in new ways. A Bluebird slogan might have been, come for the air, stay for the freedom. The Bluebirds embraced excursions for the sense of independence and adventure that was fulfilled. Sherwood called the area a Rocky Mountain playground. Bluebird excursions came in many kinds of packages. They could do a 10-minute walk from Bluebird Cottage to the surrounding canyon with whimsically named points of interest like Witch's Cabin and Enchanted Mesa. You imagine how that sounded to them, right? Those with a taste for roughing it could camp a few miles away in the mountains including al fresco dinners called steak fries. And this is Florence Malloy. I'll say a little bit more about her in a minute. She and her partner had a taxi service, and then later they opened M&M Ranch. I have a question. In hiking around Gold Hill, does anybody know where Chicken Run is? Chicken Hill?
Chicken Hill.
Okay, I've seen it as Chicken Run. Okay, so maybe afterwards you can tell me that. Also, Sherwood Point. So Maggie showed me a picture of the Bigelow Point above where Bigelow's cabin was on Porch. Exactly looking up, but I don't know where Sherwood Point. So maybe they were the same name and just got called. So Chicken Hill, we'll learn more about that. Okay. So they could also go further afield for 80 cents. They could take a tally-ho, horse-drawn coach 12 miles up Boulder Canyon to Boulder Falls for lunch and play. For 80 cents, they even got lunch. And $1.50 bought a narrow gauge trip on, you guys I'm not sure know, the Switzerland Trail. They could go to Eldora, ski resort, or they could tour the old mines coming up close to here. And in the earliest days, particularly hardy bluebirds could make the 3-day hiking and camping trip to Arapahoe Peak Glacier, which unfortunately is not much glacier left now, 14,000 feet high. That trip was actually closed in the 1920s because Arapahoe Peak supplied the water to all of Boulder, and the Boulder officials were afraid that all the people who were going up there would contaminate the water, and so then nobody could hike up there anymore. But in the early days, the bluebirds went up there. Or they could go up to, this is Estes Park. That's also from the 1921 Mystery Island. So they could go up there by car. And it had just become the national park in 1915. So that was right after the bluebirds got there. And some of you recognize A.J. Tim Walter with a couple of his different vehicles. Now, Ken Fernald has told me that the one in the upper right was Walter's White. It's called a White. And the one in the left, I believe, was his Studebaker. So if you are knowledgeable about cars, you can let me know that I've done a little research, and I know he had a Studebaker, so I think that's correct on those. The lower one, he's picking up the bluebirds at the cottage, and the upper one is somewhere in Gold Hill. Maybe Sunset View? Sunset View, okay. Good. All right. And then, for longer excursions, they use the services of Mabel McClay, she's the shorter woman, and Florence Malloy, Miss Tall. They were two New York widows, well, sort of widows, who started a Boulder taxi business in 1922. They took the bluebirds on these all-day excursions to Estes Park. And then at Sherwood's urging, Malloy and McClay opened M&M Ranch, Double M Ranch, outside of Gold Hill, still there. It's now called Colorado Mountain Camp. And they provided horses. Their guides were called horse boys. They did campouts. And in one of their ads in 1931, they advertised the hotel as attractive for men friends. They should brought one with you. And one bluebird even married an eminent cowboy. Yeah. And I write quite a bit about Eminem in the book. They had a really interesting story in Boulder, especially they got into it with their KKK. There was a lot of stuff that went on with them. They were really, really interesting. Okay. So, these excursions into the beautiful scenery of the Mountain West brought new independence to city women. For perhaps the first time in their lives, they weren't traveling with parents or brothers, nor did they have to be married to travel. Instead, they traveled with other women, some whom they met en route, some who were friends and sisters, and others who were undoubtedly life companions and intimate partners. It does seem that what we today term lesbian relationships were accepted, although not particularly remarked upon, within the category of women's friendships in the Bluebird organization. Jean Sherwood always said her only rule was, do nothing that makes someone uncomfortable. We don't know whether any Bluebird was made uncomfortable by any type of Bluebird relationship, although a couple of women did complain about women wearing pants. And pants, were just kind of becoming more common for outdoor wear, just outdoor wear, after World War I. So maybe this comment was really to do with perceptions of femininity or decorum, and had probably nothing to do with sexuality. The Bluebird Club formed a women's community. In fact, they were Boulder County's first intentional women's community, and one of the first, if not the first, in the state of Colorado on the west. So they formed a space for single, self-supporting women to experience the freedom of nature, away from the city, away from men telling them what to do. Even in their earliest days, they established a unique place for women to be independent and as a group, self-sufficient through collaborative living with other women. As journalist Lena McCauley wrote in 1914, the Bluebird household is united as a family, the outside world and the trials of working ways being forgotten. Today we might even call that a chosen family.
A chosen
Family. Chosen family. So, after Jean Sherwood died in 1938, the Bluebirds, because remember, she was quite a bit older than most of the women in the Bluebirds. The Bluebirds carried on after her death. They renamed the cottage Jean Sherwood Cottage. But as social restrictions on women relaxed by the 50s and 60s, women could travel alone and to pretty much anywhere they wanted to go. Younger women in particular didn't feel the need for even collaborative chaperonage. As the long-term Bluebirds aged and traveled less, the economics of running a cottage and a lodge just didn't pencil out. On the lower right-hand side, you can see a movie being advertised with Joan Crawford and Robert Montgomery. That's 1935, and the name of the movie was No More Ladies, which is such a hoot that they're like riding their horses in front, right? I love that. That's on the Pearl Street Mall. So in 1960, the final Bluebird president, Mary Colby, explained how changes for women were affecting the organization. She said in the 20s and 30s, girls wanted to travel in groups, and families wanted to know where they were and what they were doing. Now the only ones who come are returnees. The younger group just doesn't come anymore. And I put that's Mary Colby in the upper left-hand corner. I found out she taught Spanish in college in Chicago. She was also the president of the school board. But I think maybe I wanted to ask you, see the woman with the darker coat coming by the car? I think that might be Mary Colby. Can you tell it all? I don't know. I think that, yeah, the picture on the right, the woman on the left of that picture. I think that might be Colby, but I think she might have glasses on. She could have taken her glasses off. I don't know. I like to think that it is. Look at their clothes. Look at those beautiful clothes they've got. That would be more of those. Lake Place, maybe? That's in front of the cottage. Anyway. Let's see. So in 1957, Bluebird Cottage was sold to a CU professor and his wife. And the Bluebirds continued to come to Boulder, but they stayed in Chautauqua cabins, and they stayed at the lodge for a few more summers. But then in 1962, I'm sure you know, Bluebird Lodge and Recreation Hall were sold to the Finns, who turned it into a first-class restaurant that it is today. And in 1966, the Holly House Association, the Bluebird Club, formally disbanded, and they dispersed all their assets to do good nonprofits. But in the 50-some years they operated, the Bluebird Club brought thousands of working women to the Colorado wilderness toured and hiked and rode and laughed and loved alongside other women. They were forerunners and shapers of what by the time of their demise was known as women's liberation. They raised their own money through investments that were very savvy and real estate, and they spent their own money too, reviving the whole town in the process. Like Isabella Bird, they proved the connection between health and nature, which is a prime imperative behind wilderness preservation today. And like the Gold Hill and Boulder miners before them, they followed the gold, but what they found, treasure, was love of the mountains and their freedom and each other. Thank you. We'll go along with the sing-along. But should we do the questions first?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just put that slide up there. I want this. I took this in 2018. So question.
So are you telling us that the Chautauqua was the first timeshare in Colorado?
The Chautauqua was the first timeshare? Well, that's a good question. The Bluebird Cottage was definitely a timeshare. And in terms of the Chautauqua, what do you think? I don't know. Because they didn't really own, they didn't have ownership of Chautauqua, yeah. But at the cottage, yes, I would definitely say that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Other questions? Yes.
Wasn't Mrs. Sherwood 62 when she first started the Bluebird?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. She was a spring chicken.
No, no.
And you almost always see her wearing white. It's kind of easy to pick her out in the pictures because she's wearing white. It's sort of like when you look for the queen bee. She looks a little different. That's how Sherwood, like with her little purse, right? It's just so, she was like so ladylike, right? And then the other women were running around in their knicker, whatever they call them, the preacher, whatever. And but Sherwood, I never saw her in that. Always these long white flowing kinds of things. So, yeah.
I'm kind of curious about, over the course of, say, a week, if the women were up here,
Yeah.
what were the days like? And how much time were they out hiking on the glacier? How much were they taking art classes? Were they teaching on their own? Were they?
What did they do? I know. I have a whole section in the book that's called excursions, and that is all the things that they did. Sometimes they wanted to do nothing, especially at first, like the first couple of days. It was, to acclimate, to come from Chicago, especially if they came directly up here. It was a lot. And remember, they were working women, so to do nothing would have been like incredible, right? But then they could sign up for all kinds of things. Now, if they were staying at the cottage, they did go take classes at Chautauqua. And they also took classes at CU, because there were like summertime things that was sort of cooperative with the Chautauqua. The CU was involved in that a little bit, especially later. They could do that, but they could go shopping. The hill in Boulder was kind of a thing. They could go there and buy stuff, but then they could come up here. But sometimes they went down to Colorado Springs even, or they went to Denver. So they could actually see the whole region. They did go up into the park a lot as well. So I think they kept pretty busy. Most of them came out for 2 weeks because they had that 2-week block, right? Lifetime 2-week block for $10, right? It's amazing. So they kept busy. Good questions. Yes.
Were any of the women keeping journals that have been found?
Oh, I wish.
Like,
I totally wish. Both Maggie and I have researched in Chicago, and that just wasn't a thing. We found, all I found in Chicago museums or libraries is just the railroad information, which is something, right? Because it tells you some information. And I have interviewed one great niece of a Bluebird, but that Bluebird didn't have anything left. That's why the mystery album, that's why I was so determined to find out whose it was. So you can read about that, and You know, that was really a find. And that was something that was bought by somebody at a tag sale and then mailed to the museum, which is really neat.
Because I think it would be such an adventure to come from the city, from Chicago
I
to
know.
the west. You
And there
just
must
wanna-
have been letters and stuff. I do have
Yeah.
some postcards. I think you probably have some postcards, and I think the Finns have some of them too. So, you know, to say things like, it was freezing up there, you know, and like, you know, things like that. But it totally was an adventure. It really was. And isn't it kind of still an adventure? Yeah.
How long was the train journey?
Pardon me?
How long was the train journey?
Oh, that's a good question. That in the earlier years, it took almost a couple days, but as the trains improved, they could come out, if they left really early in the morning, they could get to Denver by late afternoon. So the trains changed a lot. Well, and that's kind of why this train stuff is in the libraries in Chicago, because they have a lot of information about the trains. The trains aren't really my thing, although I like riding them. So that was kind of interesting for me to learn more about the trains. That was constantly changing. You worked at a train
I
museum.
worked at the Colorado Railroad Museum, we did an exhibit on immigration. But when the first train that came about, we did the cross country. You had to stop, get out of the train, and go over the river and get on another train. It took a week to get 2 days to get better, and then another week to get to California.
2 weeks to go across.
Once they did the direct line, and actually the first actual continuous line went through, I believe it was a connection around Elizabeth, Colorado, not Cheyenne, like we think, because they had to cross the river. So it wasn't one train. But then it would take 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
So it took a while to get to that. But they did
This
keep
was
showing the time.
1911, so.
And in 1987, it took about 24 hours because I took a train from New York to Denver.
Oh my gosh.
And I
that's a lot.
had to stop and stay in Chicago in the winter. And that is at Christmas. And we had to stop because of the cold in Nebraska. More information than you want.
Oh, well, that's okay.
It was
So,
better.
yeah, it took a while, yes.
Yeah, do you know if there was much connection between the Bluebirds and sort of their interest in the outside and some of the women who shaped Boulder, for instance, Estella Leopold, who was behind a lot of the Blue Line and this protection of the higher areas?
I have never seen anything about connection with it, honestly.
Okay.
Or even like the Colorado Mountain Club,
Uh-huh.
really. No, they kind of did their own thing, it seemed like, to me. Although they might have known about those
Yeah.
women, right?
Yeah.
And possibly through Chautauqua, I might have met them.
Mm.
If there were some kind of talks, it's possible.
What kind of influence might they have had on the community? I'm thinking about the schools and how our plays in local school seem to be a tradition. I wonder if it has any, reflects any connection with them.
I do not know. I mean, they did, there's some pictures of them up here at the lodge where the Bluebirds are like wearing kind of costumes. So they did put on some kind of entertainment like that. But I don't know the connection with the school. And I don't think, when the Bluebirds first started coming up there, I don't think there were very many children in school at all. Right? In 1911, the town was pretty small at that point. And certainly more people started coming up again. The Bluebirds kind of got here in a lull, right? Because they'd been really busy at the end of the 1800s for mining. But when they came up here, there were a lot of empty houses. And that's part of how they were able to buy all this real estate. Because they had some money. And so they could, because it was available. But then, because they were here in part, not just because of the Bluebirds, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say really the Bluebirds saved Gold Hill, but I think they were a push toward that. And because they were, because they had some money, so then, the gouges could go in the store or whatever. The restaurants or things like that. Yeah.
And I could be wrong, maybe Boyd knows this or maybe you know this. I was up that Mrs. Yeager was once a Bluebird. she married a minor, and she became a teacher at Boulder School.
Is Max still here? You would know.
Did she, was she already here and she became a member here?
No,
Or was
no.
she from Chicago?
No, I always thought she was from Chicago. I didn't really have made that up.
I think it was Iowa.
She came from Iowa. Okay, but that doesn't mean she wasn't a member.
Okay, here, yeah.
Because
But I don't think she was, but I'm not sure. You need to ask Max.
I will.
Okay. Any other questions before we sing?
See.
Sing, okay. Let's
We're
sing.
gonna acapella.
Yes, we are. And somebody else is gonna lead it. Which one?
Jingle bells.
Let's go for Jingle Bells. Are we going to do the list already, or are we just gonna sing? We are gonna do the list.
La 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 la. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Bluebirds come, bluebirds go, all the summer long. From Bluebird Cottage to Boulder, with Tim as their chauffeur. One by one, we greet them all, and take them on some hikes. Up to Slide Mine or Bighorn, they must see all the sights. Oh! Okay, last one is Let Me Call You Sweetheart, Dear Old Gold Hill. Let me call you slow down, dear old gold hill, we're in love with you. All your pine trees whisper that you love us too. Keep your home fires burning for friends old and new. Over the dear old gold hill, we're in love with you. Roaming o'er the hillside when the day is new. Climbing up to Bighorn for a wondrous view. Go for the harmonies, you guys.